Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Warwick F1 show. This is the 45th episode of the 2025 season, and we have come off the back of an enthralling Grand Prix in Austin at the United States Grand Prix, which has seen Max Verstappen take a massive chunk out of Oscar Piastri's significant advantage over him and really announced himself to the F1 viewers around the world as a real contender in this Drivers' Championship. He was followed by Lando Norris, and Leclerc was the third. Charles Leclerc was the person who joined him on the podium. We've got a lot to talk about, so I'm not going to do a lot of preamble. My name's Anwar, I'm the host, as per normal, but I'm joined by 4 other guests, so we've got another five-person episode. We've got Lucy and Daniel, my regular co-hosts, Alex, who's a returning guest, and a newcomer, a long-awaited newcomer in Addy, our social sec. So, welcome to the show. Thank you, everyone, for being here in the studio with me. Firstly, let's just get people's description of the race. We're not going to do a rating this time. I'm asking you guys to describe this race in 3 words. Starting with you, Addy.
A big surprise.
Okay, I'm not going to ask you to elaborate. Daniel.
Racing, but championship.
Interesting. Alex?
Norris Leclerc shenanigans.
Norris Leclerc shenanigans is interesting. Lucy, how about you?
Before you said 3, I was just going to say American, but no. I think, yeah, shockingly relevant.
We need one more word.
Really shockingly relevant.
That works. Right, so let's just unpack this. Addy, what made you say those 3 words?
I guess in some ways I was pretty surprised with Ferrari's performance. Considering where they were in early stages of the weekend, I really didn't think much was going to happen for them. But fair play to Charles. He made a big impact in the race result in the end, as we'll discuss later. And, you know, in the end, it's a big opportunity for Max and, you know, a really rough weekend definitely for Piastri, who, you know, has... It's a bit of a shock considering where he was at the start of the season and where he's, you know, kind of at the position now since we've come back.
It really has. I think we're going to go delve into that in a lot of detail in a moment. Alex, I want to talk to you about the Leclerc-Norris shenanigans. Would you say that was the highlight of the race, or was there something else that you picked out that you thought, okay, this is very cool, or this is very interesting for the championship?
I mean, I know I made some controversial takes last week, but to be honest, the Grand Prix wasn't really interesting. Like the race. The race. Not the Grand Prix. I would say the sprint was interesting, but not the race itself.
Lucy, you seemed to throw a little bit of a face. Do you disagree with that, don't you?
Yeah, I think it's because kind of the sprint was more chaotic. But in some ways, once the first lap chaos was kind of done, the sprint was fun. Like, it was fun to watch. It was a little bit chaotic, and so, like, it was fun. I loved the sprint personally, and I loved the sprint result. But whereas the race, I feel, was more interesting, because the race, I really felt that when I was watching things happen, I was thinking that they had kind of big sort of long-term implications. The race, it felt like there was more tension, more investment. Whereas the sprint, it felt more like kind of, like my heart rate jumped about like 200 beats per minute in the first corner and then spent the rest of the sprint like recovering to a normal baseline level.
I guess I kind of hold the same sentiment as you. I thought the sprint was pretty fun. I also thought the Grand Prix was pretty good. So I slightly disagree with Alex's take here. Daniel, just about the sprint, we've been very critical of certain races having sprints, but I felt this was... I feel like I'm pretty measured in saying that certain tracks really do fit a sprint, and I think Austin is one of them. Do you agree?
As many opportunities as we can have to see an Austin turn 1, I think we need to have those, because it's a pinch point that delivers almost every time, and there's always a bit of drama that we can feast our eyes on. So in that respect, the race start, which is the most important part of a Formula 1 race, especially nowadays with these cars, it is great to see a good old-fashioned kind of carnage at turn 1, you know, but also for the rest of the lap as well. You've got good overtaking opportunities, and we did see that not only in the sprint, but also in the main Grand Prix. The reason for my 3-word review is because the racing wasn't, the spectacle wasn't as good as it has been in recent years at COTA, I'd say. So from that perspective, I said after Singapore as well, some races are not great in terms of the overall enjoyment of the race. This one was okay. I'm not saying it was bad, but I think it's kind of swings and roundabouts in terms of championship picture enjoyment as well, because it's getting to fever levels. The hype's getting real now. But the Grand Prix maybe didn't deliver on the promise of what the sprint kind of insinuated we were going to get.
Yeah, I hear it. I think this. I think it was still an entertaining race in spite of the fact that we've had periods, I guess, of not much action. But before we go into all the storylines that we need to talk about, I'm going to hand it to Lucy for our race rundown.
So this is the race rundown just for the Grand Prix, not for the sprint. So if you think that this order sounds a bit weird, no, this is not including the sprint. First place, which would be the same for either, Max Verstappen, really very dominant. I'd say that both this and Singapore, and actually Baku to be honest a bit as well, we've effectively had 3 races in a row where a driver has kind of just sort of driven off into the sunset and never really looked in doubt, which I think, to be honest, we are used to seeing that from Max Verstappen, but less so this year, and so I think it's always interesting when that comes up. Second place was Lando Norris. Did start in second, but got beaten off the line by Charles Leclerc, who he then spent most of the race trying to overtake, which I think provided most of the sort of front of the field watchable action, but very good battle. Speaking of Charles Leclerc, he finished third, well-earned podium for Ferrari, not least because they made a strategy that actually paid off. Him starting on the soft tyres, I think, was a good move. I think getting him ahead of Norris was a good plan. I mean, that is sort of the aim, is to beat your rivals, but yes. Fourth place, Lewis Hamilton. Never kind of looked in touching distance of a podium, but still a very good weekend for him. I mean, it's fourth place, it can hardly be a bad weekend. And yeah, I'm hoping we're seeing Ferrari sort of come into their own a bit more. I think that would be fun, especially if both drivers are up there pretty consistently. Fifth place, Oscar Piastri. Really, I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but this is another bad race in a series of fairly underwhelming races for Oscar Piastri. For considering that, especially after Zandvoort, we probably thought that he had we were talking about that the championship was getting boring and that he had quite a grip on it. I think he is at the rate, he's kind of very much at the risk of letting that slip out of his grasp, snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, as it were. Sixth place, George Russell. He was there. I did forget that Mercedes were here for some of the time, apart from one specific incident. But yeah, George Russell was there. Very good sprint performance, fairly okay Grand Prix performance. Not really much more to say. Yuki Tsunoda, who I think we might talk about a little later, but 7th place. More than 1 point as a Red Bull second driver, and generally I think that he has had a good run of form, and that I'm hoping that this is a consistent change, especially since his seat's in so much danger. I think it would be really helpful. 8th place, Nico Hülkenberg, first point since his podium at Britain. They both start with BR, sorry. He's wearing a green shirt or something, I don't know. But yeah, so he got points, nice for Sauber. 9th place for Ollie Behrman, again, pretty solid. Very nice for my F1 fantasy team, which does have him in it. 10th place, Fernando Alonso. Not quite matching the highs of his Singapore results, but still very good point and produced some good battles. So, you love to see it. 11th place, Liam Lawson, just missing out on a point for Racing Bulls. 12th place, Lance Stroll, considerably more anonymous than in his sprint escapades. 13th place, Kimi Antonelli, who, apart from driving into Carlos Sainz, didn't really do very much. Alex Albon spun at the first corner and then did make sort of a recovery drive, but yeah. First pointless race for Williams in a while, though, so that's nice. Esteban Ocon in 15th, not matching the performance of his teammate, but he was there, he finished. Isaac Hadjar in 16th, just quite a bad weekend for Racing Bulls, I think. Franco Colapinto in 17th, seemed very annoyed at the fact that his teammate existed. outfinish his teammate, finish above his teammate. I don't know. But yeah, seemed to be having a fun enough time. Gabriel Bortoletto in 18th. He was also there. There's not really much more I can say. Pierre Gasly, last of the classified, finishes in 19th. His teammate said that he was really slow, and his teammate was correct. And then the not classified finishers, despite an excellent grid position, was Carlos Sainz, which I'm blaming Kimi Antonelli for.
You can tell Lucy was really hurt by Carlos Sainz retirement, and
I just started screaming in the Clarendon. There was genuinely some heart rate.
Yeah, I heard it, and I was sitting on the other side of the kind of the pub, which was less than ideal. But it's time to get into the meat and potatoes of this Grand Prix, and it's the predominant storyline that everyone's taken out, and that is Max Verstappen announcing himself in this World Championship for sure. We were kind of teetering on whether he's in it, outside shot, for a few episodes prior, weren't we? But now I think it's very certain that he is going to play a significant role in this, because he took home an incredibly dominant weekend. The only thing he was really missing was that fastest lap, which was held by Antonelli in the race. But outside of that, perfect. Nothing more that he could have done. Is this amongst Verstappen's best drives in Formula One, or best weekends in Formula One?
I mean, he's had a lot of great weekends, so saying it's one of the best is, you're comparing the best with the best. It's hard to pick 1 out of 10, but it's certainly one of the most impactful that he's had in a while, and really just reasserting himself of, I am who I am. I am a 4-time champion. And this is what I can do at any given moment. And you could just tell immediately, as close as Charles got, as soon as Verstappen started getting distance, it was never a question of whether, he was going to get overtake or not. It was a very smooth performance in a time where, again, just to reaffirm his presence in the championship, where, for the longest time of the season, it was really only ever about the 2 McLaren drivers. And, credit to Verstappen, credit to Red Bull as well for, persisting with, keeping that option open. And now, he's in a position where he's got nothing to lose. And, he's the one that's sort of the underdog in the scenario. And, when he's backed into a corner, he can pull up some pretty spectacular stuff. And, this was just another example of that.
Absolutely. I think Verstappen himself probably didn't expect himself to be in this situation. I think if you look at some of the things he's been saying in press conferences earlier in the season, he was kind of ruled this out as an opportunity, and rightly so. It didn't look like the Red Bull had any type of answer to the McLaren's pace, Daniel, right? My question here is how he's won 3 out of the last 4. Do we think that the track characteristics of the places he's been competitive at in recent history bodes well for the rest of the season?
Yeah, I think the track characteristics are generalisable enough to say that the Red Bull will be competitive. I think Max Verstappen also, because he's just, in contention for one of the GOATs, he will be able to put himself into those positions anyway. Verstappen glaze is never far away from Formula One, but I think it's earned, it's rightfully so, right? It's just kind of an omnipotent performance. I won't lie, I think the McLaren and the Red Bull were evenly matched at COTA. In clean air, Norris and Verstappen were lapping very similarly. So there was never really any doubt that Verstappen was going to win. Obviously, even if Norris had rocked up onto the back of him by some miracle, he wouldn't have got past anyway. But for the remaining tracks, we've got Mexico, which is very specific, but Red Bull have always gone well there anyway. They know how to set up the car, and Max Verstappen knows how to win there. He's had, 4 wins there in the past. The Qatar is going to be a struggle with the temperatures and the tyre degradation, but Max is just a beast in the high-speed corners, and that has been a strength of the Red Bull car as well. I think Vegas might be a little bit more of a struggle track for them, and potentially one where McLaren could close up, but it's not necessarily going to be a McLaren-dominated weekend either. So I think he's certainly throwing the cat amongst the pigeons with his recent run of form, and long may it continue, honestly.
Looking closer to this race specifically, Daniel, I guess, is coming as a follow-up. Was Verstappen, how much would this race have changed if Leclerc did not make that first lap overtake on Norris? Did we expect Verstappen to be able to keep that distance? Because he was very comfortable. He eked out a 10-second advantage over Leclerc at some point. and that ultimately insulated him from any type of pressure that Norris could kind of put up. How much could this race have changed if that first lap overtake did not happen?
If all other circumstances remain constant,
Yeah.
and, for example, the strategies were equal as they were on Sunday, I don't think the result would have changed. However, I think if McLaren had opted to start Norris on the softs, he would have had a much better opportunity to get Verstappen at the start, which could have entirely changed the course of his race. It would have put Max into the dirty air, which would have made it hard to follow, especially in Sector 1, where it seemed like it was really tough to stay close to anybody, really, no matter the car you had. So Norris's race was definitely hurt by getting overtaken by Charles. But if, for example, he started on the mediums and Charles hadn't managed to overtake him even on the softs, I still think Verstappen would have just cleared over a second on the first lap, and he would have been good to go.
Yeah, I mean, you always hear with COTA as a circuit, and then you do see it as well, that it's, even though kind of you obviously get the DRS, it's not like they don't have a DRS zone or something, but it's really not that powerful around COTA. So I really feel that kind of, in that sense, because Verstappen got into the lead and then didn't have any problems, it's not like he built like a 20-second lead and then his like brakes failed or something and that dropped down at the end. He was just sort of there. I feel like kind of really the start was sort of just kind of did determine the sort of the way that the race was going to go and made it a race more about strategy than necessarily anything else.
Yeah, I think before we move on to like the Norris situation, I guess Verstappen, he ultimately was so domineering over the course of this weekend. He showed himself up. He showed up in both qualifying. He won the sprint. I know we didn't mention it, but he did win the sprint, and that was also, I understand the virtual safety car and safety cars in that, but it was never really in doubt, to be honest. I guess, how much confidence do you have, Alex, that Verstappen will be able to continue this rich vein of form that he's in? Because he's won 3 out of the last 4, as I mentioned prior. Do you expect that to continue?
I think with the courses that we have like soon, I feel like that could benefit, Verstappen over the McLarens, because it's been historically like, you know, a Verstappen stronghold. Like, he's been strong at the end of every season, especially like seasons which he's won championships, like 22 and 23. And I feel like his expertise in like Mexico and Brazil would in turn lead to him closing the gap. I'm not sure about the very, very late races such as Qatar and Abu Dhabi, so it might come down to like a very close showdown, but I do think that in the next 2 races, like by the end of Sao Paulo, he'll just close the gap in my eyes within like 20 points, or even maybe 10 points if he's lucky.
Go for it, Addy.
I mean, my sort of point is with Verstappen is, you know, he's in the position where he's really only got to worry about himself and his own race. He's not got sort of the burden of, like, you know, McLaren. We'll talk about them and, you know, how they've had. But, you know, he has to focus on himself, and that's all he can really control. It doesn't really matter what happens around him. And, you know, I guess because he doesn't have that burden necessarily of, you know, he doesn't have to defend the lead. He's, you know, closing the lead. He hasn't got the burden of, like, you know, he has to drive safe or whatever. He's really just got to go for whatever he can do, and, you know, that's something he very much well backs himself to do everything that he can on weekend, even if, you know, it doesn't look great. He'll still find a way to eke out points in the situations where, you know, you would have any other driver you may have thought, you know, that's them out of it. But, you know, it's Max Verstappen we're talking about, and, you know, and Max Verstappen that's, you know, only really focused on what he can do himself.
Would you say that the fact that he is playing this role in the championship, he's never played this type of role before, really, where he's having to make a significant, make up a significant deficit to a team that has been pretty dominant over the course of the first half of the season? Do you think that do you think having that kind of luxury of knowing that A, he's always going to be the number 1 driver, B, he doesn't really have anything else to fight for, there's no Constructors' Championship to fight for, do you think this is just a perfect storm for Verstappen to do what he needs to do and somehow steal a championship away that we would have said belonged to McLaren?
Well, yeah, I would agree. It's very much just best case scenario for Verstappen at this point. Again, you know, Constructors was very much a bit of a whitewash by McLaren, so, you know, Red Bull don't have to worry about that. They can put all their efforts of, you know, just making sure Max can get as many points as he can at any given moment. And, you know, but even if he did have that burden of, you know, he's in a position where he's not the underdog, you know, he's not the person who's at the forefront of winning it, you know, even though he's very much in that discussion. You know, even if he did have that pressure on him, he's proven already that he can handle it. So, you know, I wouldn't put it past him, even if he was in the position where the McLarens were, you know, he wouldn't necessarily worry too much about what other people are saying, because he's never been one to worry about what other people say for anything.
Of all the people on the grid, I think he's the most insulated from pressure. I think he is just able to absorb it and then throw it out the window. I don't think he, like Ali mentioned, really cares. I think an interesting point to bring up here, and this is not me disputing his ability in any sense or saying that or trying to diminish the achievement. Lucy, do you think this is also a reflection of Red Bull's car being better recently? Because we will get onto Yuki Tsunoda at some point in the episode, but he also performed pretty well compared to some of the lowly standards he set earlier when his reign here. Do you think that's also a helpful factor to have?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked on past episodes about whether, maybe it was Baku even, about whether we felt that Red Bull had failed Verstappen by not giving him a good enough car in the middle of the season. I now don't think we can say that. We can probably just say that Red Bull gave us an exciting championship. But no, I definitely think, I mean, obviously Tsunoda and his improved performance clearly show that the car is at least more drivable, even if its absolute performance is maybe the same. But even Verstappen, you know, while he's always had a brilliant driving ability, over the kind of past 18 months or so, we have heard him, you know, sort of commenting more about setup and being not happy with how the car is driving and feeling more like he's battling the car. And it really feels like for the past couple of races, particularly this one, that wasn't the case. That he seemed very comfortable in it, which probably indicates that Red Bull have maybe solved some of the underlying problems that were making it such a nightmare to try and drive.
Indeed. I think the fact that Tsunoda's performing better is also is reflective of that. I think let's move on to the other big winner of this kind of race. Although he didn't move any positions from his qualifying spot, I would argue that Lando Norris would come out of this weekend knowing that he's done a good job. And he's made because he's ultimately shaved that championship advantage to now 14 points, if I'm not mistaken. And that suddenly seems very assailable compared to some of the figures we were seeing earlier. And this is also a big bite into it. It's 8 points that he gained over his teammate Oscar Piastri over the course of this weekend. Daniel, do you think that Norris will come out of this thinking he's the biggest winner out of this race?
I think that Norris is definitely going to be looking at Max now. I don't think he's going to be considering, I've made up 8 points on Piastri, that's enough for now. I think he's going to realise that at some point he's going to have to take the fight to Max, just like he did last year, if he wants to win his first championship. Because Max is a clear and present threat. Everybody's saying it. McLaren said it when Verstappen was 70 points back. I don't know if they really believed it, but now surely they do, right?
I think they probably were cognizant of that. At least not. I think I was talking to my mates about this at the Clarendon, and we were thinking. I don't think Piastri probably had it in his head, but I do think Norris, based on the fact that he has gone head to head with Verstappen, and I think in his interviews he seems to always reference the fact Verstappen is lurking in the background. I think he's definitely got that in his head for sure.
Yeah, I think he does. From Piastri's point of view, I think the performance in Kota was probably more reflective of Piastri's slump that he seems to have fallen into than Norris's brilliant performance, for example. So it's almost panic stations now for Oscar Piastri, I'd say. But I don't know, really. I think, is it poor form, or is it just a couple of off weekends? Because Singapore, if you think about it, he did out-qualify Lando, and he was on track to finish ahead of him had that move at turn 3 not happened. So the two races either side of that, yes, were poor, but he has it within him to bounce back in Mexico, and he's certainly not out of it, even though he's being caught hand over fist, 65 points. Verstappen's brought down the deficit in the past 4 races or so. Piastri's not done with this yet.
focusing on more Norris, because we will get onto the Piastri point, because I personally think there is a slump involved, rather than, I do recognise it's a short period of time. I think it's enough for me to call it a slump, but we'll get onto that in a few moments' time. Alex, I want to ask you this question about Norris here, because he's been able to bring it down this gap slowly but surely, and now he's taking this pretty big hit against Piastri's advantage now. Do you think that Norris is the type of driver who, when the wind is in his sails, is able to perform better, I guess, and essentially hit a new level?
Yeah, so I have some pretty interesting stats on my computer right now. So the 2024 season, which finished in the exact same order of races, so Mexico, Sao Paulo, Las Vegas, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, Norris's finishes were P2, P6, P6, P10, P1. Yet Oscar's finishes were P8, P8, P7, P3, P10. So I know that, in the latter stage of the 2024 championship, McLaren did sort of like take it easy because they already secured the constructors. That's probably why, like, you know, Max Verstappen, like, I'm seeing his results, and he of course got P6, P1, P5, P1, P6. So of course he had like way more points than either Norris or Piastri. But I do think that Norris, the fact that he still managed to like sort of keep Verstappen in a bit of company, whereas Oscar Piastri just sort of tailed off, like especially Abu Dhabi P10 was a bit disappointing, and Lando actually got 60 points from the last 5 races compared to Piastri's 30. And looking at the gap now, that's more than enough for Lando to overtake Oscar. But to be honest, Max is catching up so fast that like he could overtake both within, possibly by Qatar.
It is crazy to think about the pace that he's catching here. I personally think Norris has been better over the last few races, particularly. I think that's something I've noticed, and I do think, I think it's maybe I have more of a hypothesis. If you guys disagree, I feel when the car is less competitive, Norris seems to perform better relative to his teammate. I think when McLaren had that dominant car earlier on in the season, it was very clear that Piastri was bringing the level of consistency that you'd expect out of that car, and Norris was probably a little bit underperforming relative to that. But since the cars have been a little bit more pegged back versus the Red Bull, or the Ferrari, or the Merc, for example, I think that Norris seems a little bit more comfortable when he's dealing in some of these dogfights. What's your perspective on that, I guess?
I mean, I guess my main issue with Norris for last 2 seasons has always sort of been how well he copes with the expectation. When he's in a good car, obviously, we expect him to do really well because he's shown, he can win a race weekend. He's got enough experience in Formula 1 to get the job done. But I always feel like, sometimes he takes sort of that expectation as a burden on him. Whereas if he's the underdog, or I guess like loosely quoting underdog because he's still in a very competitive vehicle. But, when he doesn't necessarily have that guaranteed expectation of like, you are expected to win a Grand Prix this weekend without any sort of rebuttal or anything from anyone. I notice it tends to weigh a lot on him. And he also expresses that a lot on weekends, especially when he gets asked, what happened here. He comes out of it in a really slumped mood.
I do think that's changed recently, though.
But it has changed recently, and I think that's been because he's now experienced what it's to go through that whole process, And with the whole point of we've been discussing past results, I definitely do think past results hold a lot of validity. Especially when it comes to I want to say about Piastri, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah, we will.
But we have to remember that, last season was last season, and whatever everyone learnt from last season, everyone's taken away something this season. I think Norris is, there's still some holes in his sort of personality and his racecraft that, still need to get ironed out, as there is for, a lot of the drivers on the grid. No driver is perfect, not even Max. But he's, in terms of his sort of approach to race weekends, he's very much sort of become more composed, especially recently. He's become a lot more composed, where I think, his teammate might start to be struggling now.
I think you raise a very good point, because I think that he has changed his attitude, and I think also the fact that where he is in the championship, the fact that he doesn't have the pressure on him that he has to defend a lead now. I think it's a very different mentality if you are sat in behind the chaser. And I think that suits him and the way he thinks better. I will say, and I'm glad that you brought this up about him still having holes, because he did finish in the same position that he started with. He didn't make up any positions over the course of this weekend. And I was particularly, something that kind of irked me, I guess, was the fact that there's still issues with his conviction when he makes overtakes, or his intent, because I felt he took too long to get past Leclerc, who ultimately was on soft tyres that were wearing down quicker than the mediums, or theoretically should have done so. Lucy, was that something that you noticed as a bit of a disappointing thing, the fact that he took so long to make an overtake onto Charles Leclerc that he ultimately lost his opportunity to try and chase down Max Verstappen?
I think that's kind of looking at it in quite an absolutist way. To be honest, this is also because of the fact that I'm slightly scarred from Singapore, but it is my personal belief that watching Norris and Charles battle it out, and because it was actually genuinely quite entertaining, watching Norris and Charles battle it out was 100% more interesting than watching Norris try to close down a 10-second gap to Verstappen. Given that the cars were on such parity, had them kind of been much better than the Red Bull, I would have said yes, it would have been really exciting, had he overtaken Leclerc with like 20 laps to go and then could he close the gap or something, that would have been interesting. I personally found it more fun to watch Norris battle with Leclerc, and also because I feel like ultimately it kind of does Verstappen a bit of a disservice as well to assume that Norris would have been able to chase him down had he got past Leclerc. I think the result from the race would probably have been the same, if anything, maybe if the Ferrari falling a little further back. But for that reason, no, I don't really see it as a disappointment or a letdown. I feel like everyone was fairly happy with how it went.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I was kind of wanted to see it. Does anyone have that opinion that he should have made that overtake a lot quicker? Go for Alex.
I mean, yeah, speaking on Norris's, ability to, actually get in there and, push, since, he's in a competitive car, he should be able to do so, because, of course we know about Mad Max and his famous overtakes, but I just don't feel that, out of the people who are in, a big F1 team, the McLarens, the Mercedes, the Ferrari, and, of course, Max and a Red Bull, I don't really think Red Bull is a big team, but Max certainly is a big driver. But out of these 7 drivers who are mainly just leagues ahead of everyone else, I feel like Norris is perhaps, to be honest, the weakest in terms of actually going for it and risking it. I just don't see it from him, especially in Singapore. I mean, I saw it later on, but that was, to be honest, a bit slower than expected. And the only time where I was actually impressed by the performance of Norris was when he actually set a 7-second gap in the final laps of the race. And I was like, oh, surely Charles hasn't bottled it that much. But no, I was actually surprised because it was Norris making that gap. He was cutting off 1 second every lap. So that was pleasant to see from Norris, because if he wants to win the championship, he needs to risk.
Yeah, Daniel, I'll let you go, and then we'll start talking about Piastri. So, what do you have any response back to Alex for his opinion? Because I imagine that's not an opinion held by most.
To be honest, I think Norris is probably one of the most inconsistent drivers on the grid.
Okay.
Because if you reflect on his qualifying this year, in Q3 especially, he's been all over the place. He's either crashing, he's on pole, or he's outside the top 3 when his teammate's on pole, or it's just something seems to go wrong for him very often. And then you have inconsistencies with his racecraft as well. He can be incredibly aggressive. We have seen it before. Obviously, the more recent example was Singapore, but we have seen that side of Norris before as well. We saw it when he was dive-bombing Max Verstappen left, right and centre in Austria last year. But then we also have this Lando Norris like in Baku or in Kota, where he just does not make the move. He forgets that the inside of the corner exists. And he just tries the outside again and again. I think Jolyon Palmer said at the time in commentary, it's just scripted from Norris. You could just read his every move. And yes, Leclerc's defensive shapes were brilliant. But Norris, he telegraphed them. He telegraphs his every move. He did it in Belgium on the safety car restart. He can lead away a safety car restart. He's done it many times. Verstappen does it every time. But in Belgium, he told Piastri with his car language exactly when he was going. And that cost him the win that day. And he doesn't seem to have a baseline that he can build from to a consistent peak performance that he extracts every time. And that's what you need to be a world champion. He can unlock that in these last few races because he has unlocked it this year, but not consistently enough.
I think consistency is also a big problem with Norris. But someone else who is currently facing a few issues is his teammate, Oscar Piastri, because since the summer break, really, I think he's just not been the same Oscar Piastri that we saw before, right, Addy? How much do you attribute this to the pressure and maybe some of the controversy that has been had around McLaren and the papaya rules? Could that be potentially getting into his head?
I think there's a lot of things that have happened to him this year, and that's definitely played a big role in his sort of approach to racecraft. Because this whole season, for the last majority, when we've seen Oscar Piastri, we've normally associated him as this cool, calm, collected person on track. Doesn't really try and let things get to his head as much. Not so he's had the odd mistake here and there. I mean, his start of the season, could have been better in Australia, but he tends to approach each weekend by its own merits, and he comes in with a fresh attitude, and he stays very calm and composed. What I have been noticing now, especially since we've come back, ever since Monza especially, there's been just something about him that seems he's just a bit irritated. There's something that's really frustrating him, and I don't know whether that's sort of he's getting frustrated with the Pyro rules dynamic because
There's good reason to be.
There is good reason to be frustrated. That is it's definitely valid to be frustrated if you're someone that you have it in you to win a world championship and you can, and you just the Pyro rules feel a bit more like you're chained down. You can't really be as free as you want to be. But no, I just think that something is just nagging at him in his brain, and whatever it is, he needs to try and sort it out as quickly as possible because he's still got a relatively decent enough lead to the point where, he just has to get good results. Especially at least even if he just finishes ahead of Verstappen, like every time he finishes ahead of Verstappen, that's a dent to Verstappen's championship hopes because that's, just keeping the gap there. But I don't know, especially around the Circuit of the Americas, we haven't talked about the sprint that much, but his sort of approach to the sprint, was it a racing incident? Was it what? Either way, I just think, something is just sort of nagging at him. He's making decisions that he normally wouldn't do that are very rash, taking that sprint was that really the right time to do I've heard discussion like, Jolyon Palmer did the thing of, was it a racing incident or was it Piastri's fault? And, I get his perspective, he's just trying to get an overtake done on Norris, but, you have to be aware, turn one, you have to be aware of every other car that's around you. Because that is the one moment in the race where everyone is guaranteed to be so close together. But it's just little moments like that with his decision making where it's really costing him time, whether it be in qualifying or whether it be in the actual races himself with his racecraft, that if he doesn't sort out quickly enough, he could find himself in a position where that big championship lead that he had, or rather comfortable championship lead that he had, now all of a sudden isn't feeling so comfortable because he's not only got Lando Norris who's closed the deficit on him pretty significantly, but he's got Max who's, it seems in like the most purple patch of purple patches.
I think you can tell that he's getting flustered, right? Lucy, I'm glad that you mentioned the sprint incident. What was your perspective on it? Do you think it was a bit of a naive move from Piastri?
Yeah, I've actually just been thinking, kind of talking about how maybe it being from the summer break that he's been sort of driving in sort of his less sort of kind of thought through way. I'm wondering, and I was thinking, it's basically that his driving sort of become more reactive. Like before the summer break, it felt very much like he was kind of, any decision that he made was kind of, you were confident that it was because he just wanted to go for that decision. Whereas after this, I'm wondering whether maybe Singapore, he was, obviously there was that first corner. First corner? Was it first corner? Turn 3?
Yeah.
First corner.
Yeah,
First
yeah,
corner.
yeah.
It was close enough to the first corner that it
In that
counts.
area.
That general vicinity, where he, where I suspect Piastri as well. Probably his main priority at Singapore was, at least wait 4 corners before you DNF, and so then I'm wondering whether in the sprint he was thinking, maybe his brain saw him losing a position off the start at Singapore and thought, maybe what I need to do is be more aggressive. Maybe I need to go for the move. And then that obviously backfired on him in the sprint. So even if it's not him intentionally thinking, well, if I crash my teammate out, he can't get any more points on me in the World Championship, I think it feels much more like he's permanently reacting to kind of something that's happened before, be it to compensate for a bad race result or being shaken by it, even a bad quali performance. He was pretty anonymous in the race, and I'm wondering whether, him not doing that well in quali compared to where his teammate was probably kind of had an impact on that as well.
Yeah, I think that is a very good... I think you've raised a few good points. My question to you, Alex, off the back of that is, he's obviously not in the best... He's obviously in a bit of a tough patch, right? Do you think he will be able to recover in the same way that we've seen him recover from incidents in the past? Because he's always been... There's a reason why he's got this kind of mantra or this kind of ethos of being so calm and collected. It's because it's the way he operates. It's not what he's operating like now, though. Do we think that he will be able to shake off some of the struggles? Because he needs to get this sorted out and fast, right?
I mean, Oscar P6 in USA was certainly a big disappointment because...
P5.
No, I mean quali.
Oh, sorry, quali, yes.
Quali Q3.
Yes.
So I'm looking at the quali results, and his next worst result was... I mean, Azerbaijan he crashed, but his next worst result was at Miami in Q4. Sorry. So the rest of the season he was Q1, Q2, Q3. Just he qualified in first, second, third place, and of course Norris has been a lot more inconsistent, like the crash in Saudi and 7th place in Azerbaijan. But speaking about the race themselves, he's been a bit off. Like, I know there was that blip in Australia, which was his worst non-retirement, but he should be getting podiums, and I do think that this could be an issue because the gap goes down to 14 points. And I do think that Norris now currently has the upper hand because the confidence is growing. Of course, the gap between since Zandvoort, Norris gained one in Monza, gained like 13 because Oscar retired, of course, in Baku, 1 in Singapore and 3 in Kota. So that's like massive. If we don't count Baku, then that's a place gain of 5. And that's, he's closing down. But I do think that Oscar really needs to get his quality sorted out because 6th place is not good.
Yes. Now, I think another meddling factor is the improvement of a certain team that we really don't have hope about on this pod. We've almost grown bored of it, haven't we, Lucy and Daniel? Like, we don't normally talk about Ferrari because there's there's nothing to talk about. Except there is. This weekend, Ferrari actually had pace, and you know what? We joke about and meme about their strategy department, but honestly, I felt they got it pretty spot on in the race. Addy, what's your stance on it?
It's a big sigh of relief from me. I think genuinely this weekend, aside from Charles ending up holding off Norris, really couldn't have gone any better for Ferrari. Whether this is an actual, whether this is just a blip, or, this is something, ultimately they want to push for P2, they want to finish the season off strongly, because even if first place is gone in the Constructors, there's still second place to fight for, and, whether that plays a factor or not, we don't know, but this is such a big boost in morale for Ferrari. Charles' strategy was a very brave decision to do, because based on all the data that all the teams had, everyone was thinking these softs aren't going to really last that long. But Charles' strategy ended up making every other team on the grid rethink their strategy because, Charles was able to make it work. Coupled with some really heroic defensive driving by him, great effort by him to hold off Norris for as long as he did on used softs. It was really just a moment of right place, right time for Ferrari. Cota's been a track where recently they've had a lot of joy in. Last season, of course, was quite a great result for them. Obviously, we've not had anything like that this season for Ferrari. But to be able to get such a good result from them, and the pace for Ferrari has, sometimes we say, oh, the Ferrari's just not been on it. But on a one lap pace, don't think anyone's really said the Ferrari's been necessarily that slow. They've come up with really good qualifying positions, especially with some points. I think it's just the problem is the race pace we've always said just hasn't been there. For whatever reason, whether it's their lifting or coasting because they're plank wear, or Lewis recently doesn't seem to be able to have a car that works in the end. But the pace was there this weekend, and it coupled with some pretty great driving from both Charles and Lewis. It should also be said, Lewis also did some pretty good maneuvers, especially at the start of the race. Couple of that together, and you end up with a pretty strong performance for Ferrari, and it will definitely boost their morale, if anything.
Yeah, and I think another morale-boosting factor to talk about is the fact that his teammate wasn't far behind. I think this was probably a positive result for Lewis, right, Daniel?
Yeah, I think that Ferrari was more drivable on the whole, which played into Lewis, but also he did a pretty good job. I think the Ferrari it handles better in certain conditions. For example, the wind, which plays quite a factor in Gotha, as you can see by the huge USA flag that they have at Turn 1 by the grandstands, right? There was a lot of wind in that place, and Ferrari's ability to deal with that wind and extract kind of consistent performance is an advantage that they hold over almost every other team, which we saw in Hungary as well, when the wind literally changed directions and Charles Leclerc put it on pole. So that means for their car, it's like I said, it's more stable, which allows both drivers to extract the maximum, which is why they pretty much qualified within a tenth of each other. And then on race day, of course, I don't think the wind was as much of a factor, but they just kind of, I don't know where the pace came from, to be honest. They haven't brought any massive upgrades. I think relative to McLaren, it's probably flattered them a little bit because there was the narrative that McLaren missed out on running in the sprint, which means they didn't have any long run data at all, which means they needed to compromise on their ride height. So their pace kind of took a hit as a result. And Ferrari, of course, had full data from the sprint, so they didn't have to compromise on that, although they normally do compromise on their ride height, but they didn't have to. So maybe that played into their hands, and of course Red Bull's as well.
My quick question to you, Lucy. I want a one-word answer out of this one. Will Ferrari go back to normal operating behaviour at the Mexico?
Am I allowed to give one word answer and then say a sentence?
Yes.
No. I think that genuinely, I think that Ferrari could somehow fraud P2 out of this Constructors' Championship, and I think it will be because I'm hoping that this is the case from this race, that Lewis and Charles will start performing on a more even than it has been so far level, in a way that Mercedes and Red Bull cannot rely on both of their drivers to do.
Fair enough. Anyone agree, disagree, one-word answers?
Agree.
Cool. Right, I think it says a lot about us and Ferrari, innit? It's just, we're bored of it.
I'm tired.
Yeah, we are.
Need a nap.
One more quick little pointer, and I want to ask Alex this question, and this is about a driver who still is under pressure for a seat, but I felt has really begun to recognise, we're beginning to recognise that he is F1 calibre, and that is Yuki Tsunoda in that second Red Bull. It's clearly his confidence has been shot for quite a while, but I think, would you say that you would take confidence in his ability now that he's got a couple of more points tallies under his belt?
I still think P16 is highly disappointing, especially for a second driver.
Are you talking about specifically qualifying there?
No, sorry, I'm looking at the race standings now.
He finished 7th.
No, I mean in the championship.
Driver standings, sorry.
Driver standings, he's P16. And he finished P9, P6, P7 in Zandvoort, Baku and Kota is certainly an improvement. However, we do need to see him at least once in the top 5 so that he can actually cement himself, because to be honest, like, there's clearly like 7 drivers, like I said in my last speech, 7 drivers who are ahead of the rest. And yeah, just in general, Yuki has not proven himself to have the Red Bull seat, because if he had at least one race, like for example, we have Hulkenberg, we have Hadjar, and we have Sainz, who all managed to have one really good race to prove themselves that they are worthy of the F1 seat. However, Yuki just hasn't had that. And I know in qualifying he got 5th place one time, and that was in Melbourne, but yeah, his qualifying has been a bit rough, especially in the middle of the season in the European leg. But I mean, his race pace, yeah, I think what's letting him down, even though his quality is better, what's letting him down is just the race pace. He just doesn't seem on it, and I do think that it's partially down to the team, but I think it's mainly I think he's just not a great fit for the Red Bull car. Like, I don't think the driver to car harmony is there.
Quickly, before we move on to predictions, we're going to get 2 rebuttals, I reckon.
I would actually argue that Yuki's race pace hasn't been the issue this season, because I actually think if you look at some of the performances he's had, he's actually been able to make up a decent amount of positions even when he's starting lower down. I actually think it's his qualifying that's been letting him down the entire season, because, you know, your racecraft could be as good as it possible, but if you're starting at the bottom half of the grid, you can't really do anything with that. So I get the idea of, you know, he hasn't got any points in order to show, you know, like any good like results in terms of like he hasn't got a P5 or a podium to say, you know, this is me, I'm a big like figure here, I still have a role to play. I think in terms of his actual racing, I think it's actually been solid for the most part, considering he's been thrust into that Red Bull seat kind of unpredictably. It's just his qualifying really needs to improve if he actually wants to get a good result.
Yeah, I think the fact that Tsunoda is, I mean, I don't think he did this weekend, so this is immediately aged quite badly, but is now kind of consistently at least getting out of Q1 a fair bit of the time, is kind of, because I agree, I don't think his racecraft has ever been, or his race pace has ever really been the problem. To be honest, I think that if Tsunoda hasn't done enough to earn the Red Bull seat, in part we've not had direct comparisons because the RB's pace has fallen off a little bit, so it's not like we're seeing him fight with Hadjar on track or anything like that. But if he's not done enough to earn the Red Bull seat, if his trajectory even just continues at the same level he's going so far right now, then I feel like that's more an indication that Red Bull had sort of made up their mind already than that there's something inherently lacking in his driving ability.
And with that bombshell, we're going to move to the prediction segments, which is our classic section of the show. And we have got 5 sets of predictions, so that's why I've allocated a little bit more time for it. Ada, you're going to be here just in shock, in surprise, in disappointment.
Oh boy, I can't wait.
Because the rest of us have put predictions, and we're all in the studio. So let me get that document up. Who wants to take us away? Lucy is the one who's volunteered, so you take us away with your sprint win and your top 5.
Hello. Yes, it's me, resident bad at predicting things person. However, I did predict that Verstappen was going to win the sprint. He did, in fact, win the sprint, so I will take that. I said Piastri was going to finish P1 in the Grand Prix, which we don't talk about. I said Norris P2, so I get 3 points for that. Russell P3, which I don't get anything for. I said Albon was going to finish P4. He obviously didn't. But Williams did get a podium this weekend, so I'm going to say there was something in my brain that was vaguely along the right lines. Give this to me, Anwar, please. I need this.
Right, I think I don't need to say anything. Daniel, can you give her the bad news?
Oh, it's not even up for discussion.
I'm not
even
asking for points. I'm just asking for sympathy.
No, we don't do sympathy around here. What was your P5?
P5 I said Verstappen, so yeah.
So sprint winner is 3 points, and then 3 points for correct position. So she's currently on 6, which is honestly very much higher than her average.
I feel like you're patronising.
Yeah,
me now.
absolutely. I'm sorry,
I
Lucy.
will be lodging a formal complaint.
Please don't. I'll lose my job. Daniel, follow up. What was your predictions like?
Actually, surprisingly good. Okay, we had a sprint win Verstappen, which is a tick. We had P1 Verstappen, tick. P2 Norris,
Right.
P3 Leclerc, tick.
Right, I think you're on course for a very good total.
I'm not done yet, am I?
Oh no.
Oh god.
P4, well, Piastri, but that's still a point. And P5, Russell, but that's also still a point.
So on your top 5 and your sprint winner, you have got, if I'm not mistaken, 14 points.
I haven't worked it out, but I trust
So
you.
it's 3 times 4 because 4 correct positions plus sprint.
Yeah.
And then 2 extra points added on top,
Good.
which is already beating the record for what we have on this show.
There we go then.
So massively impressive. Alex, you said that you got all of yours in the right, all sprint winner and top 5. You got your top 5 in the right order. What was your top 5 in sprint prediction?
No, I got I got top 5 in the. Yeah, sorry, I got the top 5, the right top 5,
But not in the right order. So let me take you guys through it.
I didn't do top 5 in sprint. I did top 5 in race and sprint winner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I just said.
Oh, sorry.
It's all good. It's all good. We don't have any light in the studio. We go a bit crazy. But you've met. Just to remind everyone, Alex said that we would have a sprint win for Max Verstappen, which nets him 3 points. Lando Norris in first, Verstappen in second, Piastri in third. All of which net him 1 point because he was only 1 position off each of those. So that's not too bad. You put Leclerc in P4, which is another point. So it's full sweep of 1s at the moment. Oh no, wait. Piastri did not finish 4th, did he? 5th. Okay, I'm being stupid there. The Piastri thing he does not get points for, but points for Norris, Verstappen, and Leclerc, and he put Hamilton in P5, which is also 1 position off. So 4 points from the 1 to 5, and 3 points for a sprint winner. So far, the average on this pod is pretty impressive, which says a lot about us. Yeah, less said better. Right, let me quickly go through my top 5 and Kamal's top 5, who joined us on our view-breaking show somehow. So my sprint winner, I said Lando, did not happen. I said that Lando would win, followed by Verstappen, which is 1 point each. I did say Leclerc would finish third, so that's a cheeky 3-pointer there. And then I proceeded to say Russell in 4th, Antonelli in 5th, and I don't get any points for either of those. So I'm left with 1, 3, 5.
Wait, have I outscored you in this first section?
Yeah, so far you have, and I'm gonna hang my head in embarrassment because for the amount of stuff I say to her, I can't let this run. Yeah, it's not good.
I'm going to make a voice memo of this and play it.
Oh no! I'm giving it ammunition. That's what it is. But yeah, let me go through Kamal's, who also gave his sprint winner in the top 5. He also said Norris as a sprint winner. Piastri he expected to win. Verstappen second, Norris third, Antonelli 4th, and Hajar 5th. So of everyone, the least successful predictions. Which, for considering the fact that our least successful prediction is 2. Which is like more than what we have had on a show. It's kind of crazy, but good predictions everyone so far. Lucy, you took us away. Why don't you reveal your DNF and random prediction?
Yeah, sorry, I was very confused reading my notes, but then I realised I was reading my predictions for the next episode, so very confusing. I said Lawson would DNF. He did not, in fact, DNF. There was only 1 DNF, and it was not Liam Lawson, it was Carlos Sainz. My random was that Colapinto was going to get points. I severely overestimated the power of the Alpine. Colapinto did outscore his teammates, but neither of them were really anywhere near the points. So, yeah, there's no way I can even try and convince myself in my own brain that I vaguely did okay on that.
I don't think many of our random predictions came through because Daniel, I think you're going to give us a similar piece of news.
Yes, I also went for Lawson to DNF, and I should have known it wouldn't come through when Lucy predicted it. So that.
He can say it because he's got 14 points off the top 5.
Yeah, you arguing about 5 and 6. That's rookie numbers, honestly. Random prediction, at least, this one aged badly, at least 3 separate overtakes for the lead. And Max Verstappen led every single lap.
Likes the flag.
Not even if you include the sprint.
No, not even the sprint.
It's not
I'm
the
ashamed.
greatest.
I am ashamed.
Alex, let me remind you of your random prediction and your DNF because you said Russell DNF and kicked double points. Neither of those happened. Let's keep it a buck. We're moving on to mine, and again, I don't think we got much success here because I said DNF Piastri. I was hoping for something, and it did happen in the sprint. I'm not going to be shameless and ask for points, though. So,
I wouldn't give it to you.
Yeah, I know you won't, Lucy. Don't give me anything. But we also said three. What did I say? I said 2 safety cars. We got 1 VSC. Again, no level of success. We had the safety car in the sprint race, so that's something. I guess I was on... No, I'm not asking for points. Again, I was at least on the ball somewhere. And Kamal is the last person to provide predictions. He said his random prediction was Lance Stroll DNFing. Again, sprint race happened. Real race did not happen. So unfortunate.
Sprint race, it was hilarious.
Sprint... Oh my god, what a move. Like, just reference, he is the GOAT. I still maintain the fact that he is not a bottom 3 driver on the grid. Even though that is incredibly difficult for me to maintain.
I was going to say, I can't wait for our end of season review where we go through how all the drivers have performed all season and we...
Yeah.
I want you to try and justify Lance from not being bottom 3.
It's a bit of a rough one. And a random prediction I said was... Kamal said, not me. Devil has points. He got half of that because Behrman got points. But that brings us to the end of our prediction segment. Daniel was comfortably the winner off a pretty insane set of top 5 and sprint winner. But that brings us to the end of this review episode of the United States Grand Prix. I want to thank my 4 guests who have joined me in the studio, my 2 co-hosts, Lucy and Daniel, first-time guest Addy, and returning guest Alex. Much appreciated. We're going to be back again at some point later in the week to provide a preview episode for the upcoming Mexico Grand Prix. So look forward to that. Make sure to like, subscribe, because I know you guys have been doing that, so continue doing that, and we'll see you in the next episode. So see you then. Goodbye.